Hi-Tek Supercoat bullets produced by XMetal Targets. This is what I want to talk about today. I'm going to talk about this Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet in comparison to copper-plated bullets. There are a lot of significant benefits to using a Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet in comparison to a copper-plated bullet. First of all, a Hi-Tek Supercoated bullet obtains a higher velocity than a copper-plated bullet using the same comparative load. Meaning that, let's say both these bullets are 220 grain bullets, and I were to use 3.9 grains of Vihtavuori N320, the result will be that the Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet will obtain a higher velocity or higher power factor than the copper-plated bullet. Now, as a reloader, I'm extremely happy about that, because that means that I, in fact, have to use less powder to obtain the power factor or the velocity that I'm trying to obtain in comparison to if I was using a copper-plated bullet. The Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet uses anywhere between 10 and 20% less powder to obtain the power factor or velocity that you're trying to achieve. That means, as a reloader, I'm very happy because I'm using less powder. It means that with a pound of powder, I can make more reloads in comparison to if I was using a copper-plated bullet. The Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet has a number of other benefits. The coating itself acts as a lubricant. Because the Hi-Tek bullet does not have any copper plating, that means there's less friction in the barrel because we've eliminated any metal on metal contact in the barrel between the bullet and the barrel. Thereby you have less friction. With less friction you have less heat, and combining those two factors means you've got less barrel wear. Therefore, with the Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet, you have, or you will, extend the life of your barrel. So there's another key positive benefit. The Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet, when it comes to reloading, there are a couple of things that you should keep in mind. First of all, as I said, you're looking at anywhere from 10 to a 20% reduction in the amount of powder that you will require when using a Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet to obtain that power factor or desired velocity. So what I recommend is that you start with a minimum of 10% reduced powder load in comparison to what you were using when you were using a copper-plated bullet. Make a couple of test batches, go out, chronograph your new reloads with the Hi-Tek, determine just what velocity you're obtaining with that particular powder load that you're using, and then adjust from there. You may find that you have to reduce it even more. Give you an example, I'm using 0.8 of a grain less in comparison to what I was using when I was using a copper-plated bullet. So that's a significant savings, 0.8 of a grain, and I'm using Vihtavuori N320 as powder. Something else that you've got to consider is the flaring of your brass. You want to make sure that you flare out the brass enough so that your Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet fits into the brass nicely when it gets to the seating station, and that it remains upright in the brass. And the situation here is that if you don't have enough flare, what will happen is you'll end up stripping off some of the coating as you seat the bullet. Now, even with copper-plated bullet, you've got to have some flare, because if you don't have enough flare, you'll strip the copper plating off as well. So really, it doesn't matter whether you use a Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet or a copper-plated bullet. You've got to adjust for both bullet types just how much flare you put on your brass. I've got a 9mm round or 9mm piece of brass here, and that'll probably show you. I flared this out a little more just so you can see what I'm talking about. And really, the amount of flare that I have there is not going to reduce the life of the brass significantly. The key here is having enough flare or belling in your brass so that you can sit the Hi-Tek bullet in there nicely, and that it remains upright and straight as you go through the seating station in your loading press, and therefore you will not strip off any of the coating. If you want the full protection of the coating, you definitely don't want to strip any off, because once you do that, you'll be exposing the lead, and therefore there'll be lead contact in the barrel, and that could lead to lead fouling. So it's important, make sure that you flare your brass enough so that the bullet seats in there nicely, and it will not strip off any of the coating. So those are 2 tips in regards to reloading with Hi-Tek Supercoat. You want to start with a minimum of 10% reduced powder load in comparison to what you were using before when you were using a copper-plated bullet. And secondly, you want to ensure that you have enough flare or flaring in your brass so that the bullet sits in that brass nicely, and when you go to seat it in your press, you don't strip any of the coating off. So there you have it, short and sweet. Some of the benefits of using Hi-Tek Supercoat bullets: less friction, less heat, because we've reduced metal on metal contact between the bullet and the barrel. Thereby, with less friction, you have a higher velocity for the same comparable powder that you would be using with a copper-plated bullet, which then means that in actual fact, to meet the power factor or velocity that you're trying to attain, you'll be using less powder. So now you have a powder savings. And one other thing I didn't mention is that the Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet tends to be less expensive as well, because there's no copper plating, and copper costs more. The Hi-Tek Supercoat coating eliminates that. There is no copper plating. Therefore, it tends to be less expensive to purchase. One other benefit I should mention about using Hi-Tek Supercoat bullet is when shooting on metal targets, there is no copper plating to come back at you. That is a safer round to use on metal targets. So that's the last benefit that I'll point out to you. So there you have it. I hope that the facts I've provided and the tips on reloading come in handy when you reload your new reloads with Hi-Tek Supercoat bullets made by XMetal Targets.